Welcome to the Lead Counsel Podcast, hosted by New York personal injury lawyer Tom Tona. Join us as we deep dive into the world of law and the business of law. Stay informed, get ahead.
Hey, welcome back to the Lead Counsel Podcast. This is your host, Tom Tona. Before we jump into today's topic, I just want to take a moment to thank the sponsors of the podcast. This episode is sponsored by Tona Law. They're not just another law firm. They're defining what it means to fight for their clients. We get a lot of attorney referrals from across the country. We pay fee participation in all jurisdictions where it's permitted. We focus on integrity, innovation, and relentless advocacy. Tona Law is proving that the business of law can scale without losing its heart. If you want to see how a modern firm is built for impact and happy client referrals, check out tonalaw.com. Mention again the Lead Counsel Podcast, and I'm happy to get on the phone with you. I am excited for today's guest. Today is my good friend, Mike Zappone. Mike, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
What's going on, buddy? So Mike Zappone is a EOS certified implementer. He's my EOS certified implementer. He's also a ProfitWorks coach, which we'll get into a little bit during the episode. Mike, I could not be more excited for this episode, and I'll tell you why. I'm kind of calling this EOS 2.0 for Tona Law, which is I think we're in Tona Law 3.0 or 4.0 right now. It's been a long, arduous journey to the point that we're at right now, but meeting you has really kind of opened our eyes to a new future, right? So, I want to expose you to the people that listen to the show. A lot of it is people that are more advanced, but they're also like beginning stage people as well. There are people all along the law firm business journey, and mostly lawyers that listen to it. So let's take it away. How do you want to describe our first meeting at our EOS quarterly? You want to describe that first?
Well, I think we needed to shake some things up. So it was really a bit of a pressure cook. We pressure tested everything that was there. When, walking into a client that's already exposed to EOS, you just never know how many of the components are in place, right? You can ask and you can test, but when you walk in the room, you really need to see like, hey, are these, is a VTO coming to life? Is it alive? Like, what does it look like? And so pressure testing, all of those things is how I would, I think it was a pressure cooker would probably be the best way to describe it.
Yeah. So I would use a couple other choice words, but man, so we walked out of there and we like to do them typically on a Friday because it gives you some recovery time over the weekend. And we walked out of there and there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of us, I think, not including you. Oh no, 6 of us, not including you. And I can't even use the word I want to use, but what dawned on me after about 48 hours of digesting it was, oh, wait a minute. This was all by design. He was literally testing us, right? So but you have a very distinct methodology, a very intense personality. I think that's why we click so much is your intense personality. But, what I loved, and I want to give people some background on you, because look, I've been through another implementer. I've been through a ton of facilitators over the years. I think what sets you apart is you're a guy that's done the thing. So give some people a background about your entrepreneurial journey that led you to become an EOS implementer.
It's funny. So it started at 19 years old. And a lot of people are like, oh, I was a childhood entrepreneur and I sold t-shirts or I did whatever. But that business that I started at 19, I actually ran that company for 33 years. It was a mainstay. That's what paid for the party. And so along the way, I opened dozens of other companies. I did commercial real estates and restaurants and auto dealerships and car washes and all kinds of crazy things. Not all of them succeeded. Some of them were spectacular failures. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. But I was fortunate enough that at 53 years old, I exited the company that I started when I was 19. I took a year off, traveled around. And quite honestly, after that, I was bored out of my mind. I started working as a consultant. Somebody introduced me to the book Traction. And I was like, oh my God, why didn't I have this 40 years ago, right? This is information that would have been valuable to me. I wanted to open another business. My wife, who's been my partner for 25 years and in doing all this stuff, said, no employees. I don't think people really put enough weight on what it's like to have employees. You live their life as well. I'm responsible not only for the payroll and their health benefits and, everything I do is affecting, 1 to 100 people, depending on the size of your company, right? So that's a heavy weight to carry. So no employees was one of the things. And I found the opportunity to be an EOS implementer. And for me, while I don't have grandkids, this is what it must feel like because I get to go in, I get to work with guys like you, lots of energy. And for some reason, when I'm on the outside, I think having lived the experience, I can connect the dots, right? And I think that's where that intensity comes from because time is our most valuable asset. And I really want to move us to the finish line as quickly as we can. And so I race cars as a hobby. And so one of the things in racing cars is as you come into the corner, how late can you brake before the turn? And if you start at 1,000 yards to see where the braking point is and the braking point's at 50 yards and you're incrementally getting there, it's going to take you forever to get there. And so coming into a session like your session, we need to get to that breaking point as quickly as we can. We had, 7 hours plus or minus an hour to get to that point. And so finding that out just opened up the playbook and allowed us to move at a much faster rate, which is where I think we're doing now. So,
yeah. And look, I think that because you've done the thing, it's so different from my past experiences. Not that all my coaches and consultants weren't excellent, but when you show up at my office and you're like, listen, I was up at 3:00 in the morning because of you. I'm like, holy shit, at least I'm not alone. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like you get it on a really granular level. I think because you have done that thing, and I just think it brings a depth of richness both to our relationship, because I've been in the seats where somebody's trying to tell me this is best practices, but they have not done the thing. And so there's a disconnect. There is a disconnect, which is why I've referred some very large clients to you, because when I'm in a room, all the entrepreneurs speak in one language. If you have done the thing, right? So I think that that's, to me, when you start to talk about, and look, I'll be very raw and candid. A lot of entrepreneurs that are listening to this will bullshit themselves about a single-digit EBITDA, okay? And you cut to the quick right away on that. You're like, listen, having done this and having done that dance, don't do that. Stop doing it. Like, let's go for singles and doubles, but we gotta keep moving forward with the goal of funding growth through operations. Right. And it was very valuable. It was kind of a kick in the pants that I needed. Like I've had years of 30% and 25%. And yeah, you can fall into a trap. Right. But I think you telling me I did this, don't do this, don't do it, was extremely valuable. And I know the other thing you're trying to do is reduce dependency on me, right? I didn't realize I was still doing the things I shouldn't be doing. So when you look back and you say, having done the thing, where did you come to where you're at now as far as the visionary? And I challenge those labels, but I'll use them for you. The visionary reducing dependency and making it a business that truly is not dependent on. When did you have that first realization as an entrepreneur and now operating to get people to a less visionary dependent role?
You said my experience in doing the thing, and it's funny that the mistakes are really all of the mistakes that I've made over those 33 years are just things that if I could tell you to avoid that mistake. And, one of them was foregoing, for some reason as an entrepreneur, we all think like, hey, I'm just going to do this and I'm going to sacrifice, income because it's going to 10x later on. And we're always trying for this like next level or this other thing. And in my experience, all I did was I went without revenue. I went without personal income for that period of time. I never had the wave that came back, so when I exited the company and you get to kind of reverse engineer, look back or postmortem or whatever you want to call it, I'm looking at like, where did the wins come from? And it wasn't from me, doing this crazy thing and dropping my margins to single digits or living off lines of credit to try to build this huge thing. It was those singles and doubles. And I think, I call entrepreneurs, we're big game hunters. We're so excited about this huge opportunity that we often don't just look at the thing that we could just do and, tuck in and do all day long. And so something that doesn't consume our resources and doesn't consume our time, which is important. And then you touched on, the owner dependency. It's really interesting. I had, one of my early EOS clients, an attorney, and I don't know why. I have a lot of attorneys as clients for some reason.
I know why. I'll tell you in a minute, but go ahead.
If I went back to my high school teachers and I said I was talking with a bunch of attorneys, they would have had a totally different idea of what it was about, right? So. But he wanted to, he's like, look, I want to be able to exit. I want this firm to be able to survive without me. And we started the journey, and 6 months in, the leadership team basically voted him off the island. And they're like, look, we're good. We've got this. You can go. And I was like, wow, success in 6 months. That's amazing, right?
That's what I'm shooting for, baby.
Yeah, well, be careful because this guy was not happy. He was in panic mode. My phone blew up right after the meeting. He's like, I'm not ready to leave. And like everything he said he wanted, he didn't really want. And he ended up staying back in. But there's a huge difference when you do the thing because you want to versus because you have to. So even though he chose to stay in the business, which I would say like, hey, you kind of pivoted on your goal, he's now doing what he wants to do, not what he has to do, which is a huge difference.
Right. And look, what you're talking about at the fundamentals, and again, I always call myself a meathead, but I know my level of sophistication with a lot of stuff. At the core of this all EOS is an operating system. But what I really hope people can take away from this is that I would bet $5,000 to $10,000 right now with any takers that if you were to go into a law firm that doesn't work with EOS, that they have zero grasp on operations. And by operations, I mean real operations. I did not know the difference of what I had learned previously up until the last year when I had these really high-level operators coming in and showing me, holy crap, service businesses scale only when standards are teachable, visible, and repeatable. And you need people to build those systems. And EOS does all of that, right? Like you've pushed us on so many different things. And here I was going, I don't understand. Why am I capped? Why am I capped on growth? And so the first indicator, I would love people to have actionable takeaways here, right? Like write this down. If you're at a revenue number that's stalling or EBITDA that is below, where it should be for law firms, and I would say that's north of 25%, right? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. It's your first indication you got something going on in your business that you should have outside eyes laid on it. So, let's get into the real pain point of owners that become the system, owners that, you're growing a company and you're just throwing more money at problems and more bodies at problems. You go into business of all kinds, but you said you're gravitating towards law firms. Here's why I think you're gravitating towards law firms. Lawyers like no nonsense feedback. A lot of us want immediacy because we're visionaries, and you're a fast mover and you're very direct, right? And that's what I love about you. So what do founders do that is confusing as far as leadership for a team? Because I know that leaders can be the whiplash, right? Oh, yeah. So what do leaders do that they should be looking out for?
I think it's a couple of things. One is, the separation from what you do, right? You're in the business of law, right? And so when I first talked to somebody, said, so what do you do? Well, I'm a lawyer. Well, no, you own a law firm, right? Your product is law. And so that flip of, are you a business owner or are you an attorney that's practicing? Are you like a side gig kind of person? And if you're a business owner, the biggest thing is, what do you want from this business? Because EOS is really a force multiplier. Whatever energy you put in and whatever direction you put that energy in, you're going to get it back out. It's going to multiply your energy, your efforts hitting the ground. And so I always talk about the 3 plates. Your business is a stick with a plate spinning on top of it. And, you have your marketing and sales plate that you got to keep that running. You have your operations plate where you're delivering the product or service. And then you have your finance plate. And at the core, those are the 3 things in any business on the planet that you've got to keep your attention on all 3 of those. And so when I say EOS is a force multiplier, as we're going in, first off, what do you want from this thing? I really never anticipated that when we get to the 10-year target and I say okay, what do you want from this business? That's a really tough one. People don't know. When you ask that question, what do you want, and be articulate, you can't get that answer out of people. And it's not just one client. It's almost every single client struggles with that. And the people that are listening to this are going to be like, I know what I want, but I would challenge you, write it down specifically, make it smart, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-based, right? All those things, and see if it's really what you want. Does it really get you up at 3 o'clock in the morning? Is that what drives you to get there? And so once we know what you want, then we're going to multiply the force evenly distributed so that your sales and marketing is going to be running smooth, your ops are going to be running smooth, your finance, because as you're turning your head to each one of these, something else always catches on fire. And, look, when I got into EOS, I'm the typical entrepreneur that I could outsmart the system. And I'm not trying to give Gino any extra credit, but he does deserve a lot of it. The system really does work. And I hear people saying, I need EOS plus, or I've graduated that. This is like martial arts. You're on a journey to become better. You're either green and growing or you're ripe and rotting. So you'll never outgrow EOS. It's just like eating healthy and exercising is good advice for human beings. EOS is good advice for business owners or businesses.
Yeah. And look, I love that. You bring us back to basics all the time. And what you said cannot be, repeated enough. And if people are listening to this and taking notes, write it down. What you focus on will work if you focus exclusively on it. Mike challenged me. Mike challenged me to focus on nothing but EBITDA for the last quarter. And I have beaten that drum. And going into the month of July, we will be at an astronomical multiple of where we were. And I cannot bullshit myself that there's a fine line between investing in growth and bullshitting yourself. And you need somebody to reflect that back to you, right? On the ongoing, right? And that's what I think the accountability that comes with a system and an implementer like you. Here's the other thing for people listening. Mike's not your ordinary implementer. You'll get text messages at 4 in the morning. You'll be texting with him over coffee at 4:30. Mike shows up at your office without notice. And literally, I think he gave me an hour notice. He showed up in my conference room. It was me, him, and my COO at the time. And, he's all in once he's all in, which is vastly different from some of the experiences I've had where you do a quarterly and you don't see, hear, or talk to the other person for the next quarter, right? And again, I'm not knocking anybody from my past. Like, they got me to where I needed to be, but then to get to the next level, I needed, you're like nitroglycerin in a car, right? Like, you're the nitro button for me. I want to play a game. I never do this, but I want to play a game with you. You're going to complete the sentence. I'm going to give you the beginning of the sentence. You're going to complete the sentence.
Oh, boy.
Ready? A business is too dependent on the owner when...
Jesus, it's going to be a tricky one. It's all the time when every decision runs through you.
Right. And I didn't realize that was still happening. I'm going to own that, right? You sat in on a couple of L10s and you were like, all right, mute yourself. and then you told me stop showing up on meetings. And I was like, all right, I'll do that. I'll do it if you want. So...
Oh, you're making me sound so tough. I don't realize I was this tough. I'm kind of looking in the mirror here.
No, look, I think that's important. I think it's important because visionaries, CEOs, whatever, owner founders, we have overwhelming personalities. We get our way by force. And one of the greatest feedbacks I ever got was, so Mike also started facilitating a private mastermind that we're in, and everybody's giving the same feedback. Like, you are just bringing a different level of game to this mastermind. And, the feedback I got, which I'll share with the world that listens to this, was what got you to where you are is sheer force and will, but that will never get you to the next level. That came directly from your lips. And I just keep repeating it, right? Like, I have to be a different leader to lead a different level company. And I think you've seen some of the changes I put in effect because of you, because I kind of just, look, I'm immediately going to implement stuff you tell me. Immediately. You know that. So, quick break to thank the sponsors of the podcast. This episode is supported by Tona Law, a modern law firm built on integrity and innovation. Learn how they're changing the game at tonalaw.com. Attorney referrals accepted from across the country. You'll see what it's like when you send us a case. You'll have some happy clients. Here's the next sentence. Ready? A leadership team is not really aligned when...
These are not easy questions to answer, but when it's not a leadership team, when it's really just it's the founder telling you what you want to do. And a really good leadership team is going to challenge what you do. And I think that's one of the things that you and I have going on is that we have really good debates. And I'm not trying to win a point. I'm trying to learn from you what's your thought process. And I'm trying to make sure that I understand and impart my point. And I think always somewhere in the middle is always the sweet spot. And so a leadership team, when you can have a really good team that's going to not be afraid to say what they need to say, not be afraid to stand up and, debate your point, but at the same time, you're not debating to win. You're looking for what the best outcome is of the company. And I use the example of the band Queen. Freddie Mercury went out on his solo career. They gave him everything he wanted and he failed miserably, right? They needed that friction. And a leadership team is not a leadership team without that friction, right? If you just have a bunch of bobbleheads that are giving you what you want, that's not your leadership team. And you need somebody that's really going to own that seat and defend it.
Yeah, so interesting. It's funny because I wrote down the word friction, right? The book Good to Great talks about that in order to have a great company or team, you have to have conflict, right? And so I wrote that down because I think one of the big takeaways for me as well, and hopefully people will learn from this podcast, but like if you're showing up at your leadership teams and you're frustrated as the owner of the company, you have to look at the team that you built, own whatever it is that's going on in that dynamic, and ask yourself, have you surrounded yourself with operators, and what are those operator levels, right? There are different levels. There's the manager level, which is more of an operational firefighter, which is what you're talking about, the dysfunction of everybody waiting for the owner's okay. And then if you're frustrated with that, you ask yourself, have you surrounded yourself with real leaders that show up with, hey, by the way, I didn't tell you about this. It's solved already, right?
Yeah. And that's, I'm a big fan of that book by Dr. Henry Cloud. It really talks about how you show up and are you putting people in fight or flight mode? And so as the owner, you're like, well, I'm not getting any feedback from the room. But when you show up in the room, everybody is, you're the leader, they're the followers. You're not inviting that. And so Gino talks about letting go of the vine and people are like, oh yeah, I've let go of the vine, but not how you show up in the meeting. You didn't, so to the point where you're controlling what music is on, the music on hold, like you're not used to letting go of that vine. It's like, look, that belongs in this seat. That is not your decision. And so getting everybody to stay in their seats on the accountability chart and really being able to invite that and want it. Because it's one thing to say you want it. It's another thing, like your actions are different than your words. So if you really want it, you'll invite that and be the last person to speak, let the team come up with answers, make sure that they're coming alive. And, a lot of times an insecurity, at least it was for me, when you hire someone that is like way smarter, way more talented than you. And for the first time I did that, I was like, man, this guy's he's going to take over. And then I realized you know what? He's the exact opposite of me. And that's exactly what I need. Kind of didn't like the guy. We kind of didn't get along really well, but it was because he was a super high fact finder. I'm a quick start, right? You guys use the disc profiles, hire from your opposite profiles, hire somebody that's going to bring what you don't have. You got to be a little bit humbling to say what you don't have.
Yeah, I also think one of the things I've been repeating as a mantra, somebody just stopped me today. How do I know when to terminate, blah, blah, blah? I said, well, stop talking about the person who didn't work out and start figuring out what you did wrong in that scenario. Because one of the feedbacks you gave me that it's like all the stuff you say haunts me is, Tom, look in the mirror. You built this. You got to own what you built. And all right, so that goes into my next question, right? Accountability is broken when? When is accountability broken, Mike?
When you're not really giving them the accountability. You're not really giving that ownership of that seat. You're wanting them to execute on your wishes, not theirs. And so when somebody can own something and be accountable for it, and they could bring all of their stuff to the table. So you give me the 3 to 5 rolls of my seed and I'm accountable for that outcome. Let me bring all of my imagination, everything I want. But when you start controlling me in that seat, when you say, well, no, I don't like that. It's accountability with guardrails, right? And so that's when you're capping that creativity. And so you really have to be able to pick the right person for the seat, let them be accountable for the outcome and get the heck out of their way. It's something I don't see very often. People have a hard time saying this is my way of doing it. And I just want to circle back to something earlier you said. As you're creating training versus workflow, I see a big commingle on this. So, the process component of EOS. And so what you're talking about kind of goes around the process. This is the way that we do it at Tona Law. This is our workflow, right? And now we're going to train you how to use that workflow. We're not going to commingle those two things. And when you commingle those two things, you're taking away the creativity and the accountability of that seat. So separating your training from your workflows is really, really important with accountability.
Yeah. And I would just add on to one thing. If you're listening to this, you're likely a law firm owner. And I would place another wager that there's somebody better out there to develop systems and operations than you. As somebody who is awful at it, as somebody who I never want to be good at it. I just don't. I want my company to be good at it. But what I have found is that I have somebody now who's building those, and she's building them as workflows and automations. And then she does the training on those systems. And I have to say, and Ed, who's the COO, also helped develop some of the systemizations as well. It has been mind-boggling to see how different the thought process is when somebody actually knows how to build workflows and systems. So, I would tell people, don't do it with ChatGPT. Make sure you've got the right person who thinks in linear systems. It really comes down to linear thinkers versus guys like me or you that are like, I'm all over. You could throw 10 different things at me. I'll think about all of them at once. I'm not linear. And I'm always fascinated by that brain, right? So I think that, you're shedding a lot of light for people. And we're getting more granular than I ever did because I have a much more granular understanding thanks to you, right? So it's been a pretty interesting journey with you. And I think that's why I've become such a fan of yours because, EOS works if you work it. We started to deviate from it, and I felt all of the effects of that. We started to deviate from it a few years ago, actually, while we were still on it, with bringing on people who were like, F this system, doesn't work. Well, all right, we brought them on. I brought them on. So there are people who don't want to operate in a system. They just shouldn't be part of a company that does.
Yeah, and I think the big confusion is it's not something else that you have to do. It's how you do what you do. It's really just EOS is how you're going to do your everyday tasks and allow you to get more done, with less stress. And when it's hard to hold yourself accountable to that same standard. So somebody like me that comes in from the outside, I'm going to see things unfiltered. When you think about when you go on vacation, you come home and you look, you're like, man, the landscaping's off, or I need to paint this place. And you see things you didn't see. That's the advantage I have from being an outsider. I come in and I see everything for the very first time with a fresh perspective, fresh set of eyes. And so it's hard to hold yourself accountable, and you are naturally going to stray for the things that because we all have, different weaknesses, as you're going through. And so I'm going to gravitate. It's like for me going to work out, if I don't work out with a trainer, I'm never going to work out. I'm just not the guy to go to the gym on my own. So I have to have that appointment. If I say, I could do this, I'm going to do it. And Monday morning, I come up with a reason why I shouldn't. And that's what people do in EOS. They just kind of, inch their way out of it. And if you need somebody to hold you accountable, then work with the leaders.
Look, and I think everybody should have that, right? Like one of the things I love about you is there is no mincing of words. Like, I think I'm pretty good at bullshit myself now that I think about it. And what I realized is you do not give me an inch. Like there is no give on that with you, like a text message or email or whatever it is. And I value that because it has tightened up the game so much. You're like, hey man, if you're spending 40 grand a month, you need to know your marketing numbers and you need a scorecard and you need to know that you're all talking the same language. So now I got to go dig back into that part of the business, right? The marketing and sales and then the finance we were focused on. And, we just keep moving the magnifying glass, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think, I did the same thing is that in my head, once I've come up with an idea, it's already perfected. And so even before I've executed on it, in my head, it's done. In reality, it's not. And so we tend to move on. You're like, okay, I've got this in place and let me move on to the next thing before you've fully executed. And that's where you need that execution arm of what you're doing. And so having those other people, like you have the idea, you have the vision, let somebody else come in who's going to follow it through so that in your head, it's done. And in reality, it's done. And that's kind of the missing piece for the visionaries that I'm dealing with. And I think it's one of the things I like about law firm owners is that there's a great debate on owning something that they shouldn't own. So we have really, really good conversations. So I kind of secretly like when I can shine a light on something like, no, you're looking through some blurred glasses. And I don't know that we'll tell the glasses story here, but that might be for another day.
You know what? It's funny. We have a Seinfeld story about glasses, what Mike's referring to. He showed up in my office and it was with very short notice. I'm going to tell the story really quick.
All right.
Really quick because it was entertaining to me. He showed up in my office in my conference room and he was wearing multicolored glasses. And I was like, those are pretty eccentric. Tell the rest of the story, Mike.
So I'm in the Uber. I lose my glasses. I run into a Target to pick up a set of magnifiers, and the front was black. The sides were like this crazy color. I never looked at the sides. I just looked at the front.
Pink, blue, yellow.
Yeah, crazy color. So this is our first in-person meeting, I think, at your office. And so I go through the meeting. Whole time I go to see another client, and he says, "What the heck are you wearing?" I was like, "Oh yeah, I lost my glasses." He's like, "Did you see those? Take them off." And I take them off, and they're this crazy thing. So when Tom said, "Hey, we want to move forward with the engagement," I'm like, "Look, we got to clear the air here. I was wearing these crazy glasses and you never called me out." And we had a great laugh over it. So
Well, listen, I didn't want to say anything, but it was like a Seinfeld moment because you were wearing
Larry David,
Curb Your Enthusiasm when he was wearing women's glasses. It was funny.
Yeah.
So look, one of the things I love, and this has been tremendously helpful for me, is the specific tools, right? People Analyzer, the accountability chart, the core values have always, and that's why I didn't really push back at all when you were like, we're redoing this stuff. Like, what was your theory? Every time a new member joins the leadership team, what happens?
Yeah, it's like an ecosystem. So every time it'll change, your company changes every time. So if you bring somebody in without using the core values to bring them in, your ecosystem is changing, right? You run in another foreign object into that ecosystem, it's going to change it. And so every time you're growing your leadership team, now as we're using them to bring people in from the future, we will bring people in that share those core values. But unless you're using them on the front end to say like, hey, this company, we stand for this, and here's what that means. And the people that it resonates with, they're going to lean in. And the people that it doesn't, they're going to lean back. You're going to repel them. And so it works really well. And that's how you build an organization. But if you're not using those, your ecosystem changes. So the core values that, and if I can pick on you for a second, the core values that we had in place that we weren't using to bring people in, you saw it change. And so a lot of the basics were still there, but every time, and I have an interesting story. I have 2 clients where the leadership team is only different by 1 person. So 3 of the 4 people are the same. And I was going through the core values exercise and they said, look, it's not going to be different. We're the same, 3 or 4 of us are the same people. I'm like, look, you're probably right, but let's just do the exercise and see where it lands. If for nothing else, we'll have a story to tell. And so here's my story. they were different. It was just one
Right.
person made a difference out of, 3 out of 4. I was like, wow, one person changed the whole dynamic.
Yeah.
And then stress testing those too and saying like, hey, when we do, the people analyzer real time, a core value exercise and say, okay, like rate yourself plus, plus, minus, rate the people in the room. Is that real? Like, did we pass as a leadership team or are we just being aspirational? Do we wish we had it and we really don't? Right. And so we want to have one of these things that we're, fill in the blank, but we all got minuses on that. Well, then, that's not really a core value. And so that's what I love about that exercise.
It's such a messy journey. I'm thinking back over the years and it's messy. It's just messy. It's wonderfully messy. I mean, I can't complain. It's all, great problems to have. But, when you talk about these tools, they really do boil it down. Like you all of a sudden get to see, oh, I get it when I see all the right people in the right seat. I mean, I think I was describing it to you on the way over here, which was, I never thought I would be able to say I've got a unicorn build, right? So it just became a very transparent transformation going on. And the same way the wrong person can make your culture go one way, the right person can make it go completely the other direction. As long as you give them the authority and truly step back and give them the authority, let them have the authority and run.
Yeah. And making those, it's one of those things where, do as I, you can't say do as I say, not as I do. You have to live them. You have to make them come to life. You have to, with your VTO and with your core values, like what are you doing to keep those alive? Like how many opportunities? When did you share your vision with the team? When's the last time they heard where this thing's going and how we're going to get there, right? So you have to have that State of the Union speech as often as you possibly can. Anytime there's an opportunity, core value shout out, Tom, way to lean in on our core value, make a big deal about it. Like those are the kind of things that make it infectious and make it come to life. So that's one of the things I like about, again, I feel like I'm constantly crediting Gino here, but each one of the tools works really well. It's like a Swiss watch, like one component leans perfectly on the next. So when you fill out your VTO and you're sharing with everyone and you've got the people analyzer and, you've got the accountability chart and your scorecard and your measurables. And so as your issues, your IDSing, the processes and the meeting pulse and the rocks, it makes it all come together. And so the scorecard is going to say, hey, we've got a problem. We've got an issue, right? And we're going to IDS that. And it all works really, really well. But it only works really well if you're using all the components. A lot of people say to me, well, I think I just want to use, the VTO. Great. It's probably better than nothing. But if you really want the maximum output of this, you need to use the components designed to work as a system.
Talk to me really quick because you gave me homework to do and I'm struggling with it already. Because you said it's going to take a lot of reflection on your part, Tom.
Yeah.
Vision, right? You want me to rework the vision and really dig down. Where do people start for the vision? Because you brought it up before too. You said it's not as easy as people think, right? So I picked a 7-year window. Louisa pushed back a little bit to 5 years. I'm probably going to push back and put 7 because I have a timing thing in my head based on my age. But
you're 22, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm 24.
Oh.
No, yeah, I wish. You don't realize the value of youth till it's already gone, man. I hate that.
It's wasted on the young is what the problem is.
Exactly. If you could go back, right? A time machine. For founders that are wrestling with their vision, where do you recommend? Do you recommend one of the EOS books on vision? Do you recommend Simon Sinek's Start With Why? Drilling down.
Yeah, I think, those are all great tools, right? So, and if you need a tool, and some people will say, first pick the date, then pick a revenue if you're stuck, or, it really boils down to, it's hard for me to say for somebody like, hey, what do you want out of your business? Because it's different. And I always thought everybody wants the same thing out of their business, but it's not true. Some people want to build something that's going to go on forever. Some people are looking to build to an exit. Some people are looking for, more free time or whatever it might be. Everybody wants a little something different. So what is it that you really want and what's going to excite you about getting there? Because as we know, it's not all, sunshine and rainbows. There are bad days. And if your vision isn't real, if it doesn't really resonate with you, you're going to give up on it. You're going to bail. So when I ask somebody what do you really want out of this business? And at what date do you want that to be real? And it's not an easy question. So you and I talked about it. It's like, look, figure it out. If some people say money because it's the easiest one. I want to have $100 million company or whatever it might be. Well, that's great. But let's really reverse engineer. What does that look like? And then do you really want $100 million company. And there's nothing wrong if you're a conqueror, right? Some people want to just, take over the world, and that's great. That's what drives it. Other people are looking for different things. Like Gino sold out of EOS because it got to a point where he couldn't put his arms around. Once it got to a certain size, it was a completely different organization. So your $5 million firm and your $20 million firm and your $50 million firm are completely different businesses. And there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I want a $10 million company, because you could have a $10 million company that's really profitable. You've got your arms around it. Or you could have a $50 or $100 million company that's just, it's a shining example of what corporate America should be like, right?
Listen, I'm amazed at the stuff I hear when people actually get real and raw on numbers. And it kind of does a disservice to everybody in the room when you do that. Without giving away too much, I heard somebody say they were in a room with a firm doing north of 80 mil with 1 million in EBITDA. Like, the complexity of that, it makes no sense to me. It makes no sense. I don't care about the jet or the boat or any of that bullshit. Like, for $1 million, you might as well run a $3 million firm and take off half the year.
But those are the two different owners with two. So I agree with you, right? Give me a highly profitable, smaller business, right? That's going to spin off the same amount of money with half the aggravation. But there are people that, that want that $80 million. Like, that's what drives them. That's what gets them out of bed. And so, it's just two different people wanting two different things. And so you're highlighting what you're really looking for is something that's, a really high performing.
Listen, I'll take a $75 million company at 30% EBITDA.
Yeah.
That's a different story, 20% EBITDA, but not, I can't imagine the stress of that.
I always bring it back to racing. And so my first race car was a Ford Mustang, which was overpowered. And I was up in Lime Rock, Connecticut, which is more of a momentum track. And I was getting lapped by a Dodge Neon. I had so much more horsepower in this car. And I was so embarrassed, pulled into the pits, and I'm like fuming red. And the guy was a Skip Barber, teacher. And he said, I think I was in your head. And I'm like, yeah, you were. And he's like, I love momentum cars. And that actually turned me on to these low powered, where you really squeeze the max out of it, because you get in a high powered vehicle on a racetrack, and it takes a lot to be able to extract all of that, horsepower out of that car. But get a low powered car and you can drive it 9 out of 10. You can extract everything it has, and it all comes back to you. So for me, driving these low horsepower cars, I love like the Mazdas and the Lotuses and those little cars. They're great because it's on me, not on the car. The car can only do what the car can do. Now, to get more out of it, it falls on me. And I think in business, I resonate with that. It sounds like you resonate with that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Give me that smaller thing that I can squeeze versus this big thing, But again, there's no right or wrong answer. It's just whatever you want.
Well, I think we're at an inflection point. A lot of personal injury lawyers listen to this podcast. And I think we're at an inflection point because for so long we heard scale. Except PE's now entered the market. So scaling, you can still scale, right? You can be very lean and mean, not keep throwing bodies at it and increasing your HR with technology and personnel costs. You can keep the personnel costs down with technology applied appropriately, but scale is going to be really hard at this inflection point with PE coming in.
So, and everybody thinks, so, if you look back at other industries, right, it's the hardware store in Home Depot, right? And so the Home Depots came in, guess what? Ace Hardware is still around. How did they pull it off? So, the Uber with the limousine companies and the taxi companies, there is always going to be a spot for a boutique company that will have, really high-end clients, high-end margin. You're known for being the expert because at scale in any business, so you walk into a Home Depot, and I go to Home Depot all the time, but given a choice, I'll go to an Ace Hardware over Home Depot, because if I don't know what I'm doing some kind of, and I never know what I'm doing, by the way, I'm not a handyman. I always need to go to Ace, and the guy's like, you need to do this, this, and this. And they know what's going on. I'm going to just get a better interaction there. And so, decide what it is, decide what your margins are, but it all goes back to like, what do you want? And bigger is definitely not always better, but a really well-run company at any size is a very rewarding thing to be part of.
Yeah. And listen, again, I'm seeing a transformation in my personal injury world where I had a case close yesterday that was about as seamless from start to finish to 5-star review. Seamless. And I'm like, that's what I envisioned. Listen, John Morgan's like a Halley's Comet. Like, if you got aspirations of being the next John Morgan, I don't care how big you are, you're probably not going to be it, right? And so, as Ed has been quoted in my office saying like, look, man, Walmart's moving in, right? It's just who will be the Ace Hardware and who will be the technician who's running his own 100 files, 50 to 100 files. You can still make a dent in the marketplace being really well run, really well regarded, getting great results, great customer service, right? All the fundamentals.
The funny thing about, it is personal. So I think you might know my story, but I was in a severe motorcycle accident. I had a car pull in front of me. I, was in a wheelchair for 3 months. I've had 9 surgeries. So I've been through a horrific accident. It is incredibly personal, right? And so when somebody goes through something like that and you're really, the number one thing is, do you care about? And I think that it's really difficult to do that at scale. It's really difficult to do that. And there are companies that can do a decent job, but you'll never outbeat that personalized service. You'll never outbeat that boutique individual that's really going to be able to provide that next level service.
Yeah, as long as they've got real chops, right? I'm thinking of a friend of mine in Texas. He's got real chops. He doesn't want to be big. He doesn't want to run scale. He just wants to cherry pick his cases, refers the rest out, but making sure that every client he has that personal attention. I'd like to be somewhere in the mix or in the middle where we provide excellent service. I can't be the technician at this point, but people know that. And I've surrounded myself with really excellent lawyering and paralegaling and legal assistance. So I think that it's going to be a really interesting 12 to 18 months. We're talking about it a lot. You see it in my other mastermind that you're facilitating, but it does open the door too. You still got to be really well run, right? You got to be able to compete on that piece.
You got to be able to execute. At the end of the day, it all comes down to your ability to execute. And so, if you're running around, putting out fires every single day, there's lots of fires in businesses, but they should be the exception, not the rule. So many people I talk to as entrepreneurs are like, well, this is just what it takes to run a company this size. I'm like, no, it's completely not what it takes. And I see calm in very large companies that are really, really well run. So the better you run it, the calmer it is. And so
I'm thinking about one of the vendors I use, Titus. You know who Titus is? They're a supporter.
Yeah.
And listen, I'm sure behind the scenes it gets a little messy. I know 1 or 2 departments that they work on, but they are really well run. They're really well organized. They're a great vendor. I actually love working with EOS vendors because they have their shit together. Like they just do. And I love that. Really quick, because I know we're going to start to land the plane.
Yes.
ProfitWorks, right? Yes. Talk about ProfitWorks really quick. Because I know you're working with a friend of ours that swears by it, but it's more for, I think you've described it like EOS companies that are stabilized, right? They've reached the stabilization point, revenue and profit. And so just give a high level overview about what ProfitWorks is for the more sophisticated listener.
So it's really just an incentive. It's framing your incentive plan. And so many times I talk to business owners, and this was me, by the way, that I paid the guy X number of dollars, the girl X number of dollars last year. So this year needs to be more, regardless of how the firm did. So you're paying bonuses to people that are disconnected for how well the firm or the company is doing profit-wise. And so what ProfitWorks does is it just puts together the framework to say, guys, we're going to share the score of the game with you. We're going to tell you what the numbers are. We're going to tell you what the profit goal is. And you're going to self-fund your incentive plan. So if you made $20,000 last year or $10,000 or whatever it was, and you want it to be more, well, here's the levers that you need to pull to be able to get that to happen. And so, that's really at its core what it does. And the reason I was attracted to it when I went through EOS boot camp, Alex Freytag was my boot camp coach. And Alex is the one who wrote the book ProfitWorks. And I had failed at incentive plans. He outlines the 6 mistakes that you make in the book. I made all 6 of them. I might have even made 7. I told him there's an extra one.
You're an overachiever. You're an overachiever.
Yeah, exactly.
What's the name of that book? What's the name of Freytag's book?
ProfitWorks. It's a really easy read. It's like 90 pages. There's also a story version. So if you're not a high fact finder, story version is called Stretch, Not Snap. But
yep, I've heard that one. Yeah,
it gives you the framework to say, like, look, if you're going to pay your people some kind of a bonus or an incentive, tie it to how well the firm is doing. So if you're of the mindset that I'm okay having 60% or 70% or whatever the number may be, 90%, and you're going to share the other portion with your team, if you believe that and you believe you'll make more, ProfitWorks is really the way to do it. And it is incredibly powerful. I mean, I helped launch for ProfitWorks, had a really large company, and we went into a concrete plant. And I'm like, man, I don't know. I was a mason tender, by the way, but it is as a kid. So I went in there. I'm like, what are these guys going to know about? How are they going to move the needle? And I walked them through this exercise. And the money that these guys found, these are frontline workers. The money that these guys found was amazing. A pest control company was another one, right? And I'm like, man.
Tell that story, because that was a really interesting story.
So this is a large pest control company. And the owner said, hey, my guys are really good at what they do, but I don't know that they're going to be able to come up with anything. I mean, this is way outside of their wheelhouse. And so we go into this pest control, and I agreed with him. I'm like, look, this is going to fall flat on its face. So we go in the room. The very first session, one of the guys raised his hand. He's like, hey, I go out with a full tank of chemicals every day for every one of my trips. I might only have 3 appointments. When I come back, I have to dump those chemicals into the waste. So we're wasting chemicals and we're paying to get rid of it. It moved the needle, the profit needle, by $1 million in that company. And this was a guy on the floor who said, by the way, we're doing this and it's stupid. And, the owner, really well-run company. The owner didn't know it till he heard it from the front line, right? $1 million leaving it on the table. The concrete company, same thing. The amount of stuff that they're throwing away and that they're losing and reordering, like tons and tons of money. As soon as you tell people, hey, save us $1, we're going to share it with you. Now they're motivated.
Right. Look, I love that. So when does a firm know, a law firm specifically, when is a law firm ripe for like a ProfitWorks?
So you've got to really be able to execute. And so what I say, and the reason I say it bolts on really well to EOS, because ProfitWorks will fall on its face if you don't have an execution model. So if your team identifies all these challenges and you don't have a means of fixing them and executing on solving problems, right? If you can't IDS it, then you're not ever going to be able to get it done. So if you have, I like working with EOS companies because I know they can execute, and when they can execute, it makes it's an easier chance for success, because secretly I just love that winning. So I try to set myself up for success. And I also don't like being in a situation where I go into somebody and I can't move the needle. You mentioned that I'm intense and I'm calling and texting you. I take it personally. Your success is we're winning together, right? You have a bad day, I had a bad day. I'm going to ride the wave with you, right? So, and I like to win. So, which is why I think that ProfitWorks works really well for a firm that's executing. So if they're running on EOS, if they're getting, close to 80% completion on the rocks, their IDS sessions, that's about the right time to implement it. And as much as I'm happy to do that for somebody, you could read the book and do it on your own, just like you could do EOS on your own. I just make it a little bit of a faster process if you engage me.
Yeah, look, man, I'm going to land the plane with this. If you're listening to this, you want to talk to Mike, he'll do a 90-minute presentation on what EOS is and how it can help you. I'm sure he'll do the same thing for ProfitWorks. I cannot say enough good things about Mike. I never endorse anybody unless they can deliver the goods, Mike. You know that. But man, working with you has been, I call Mike my concierge from The Godfather. So Mike, I appreciate you coming on. What's the best way for people to find you? LinkedIn?
So LinkedIn, yeah, or my website is my name, MikeZappone.com.
Yeah, and if anybody wants, you text me and I will happily make an introduction by text message to Mike. Mike, you're awesome. Thank you for coming on. I'll have you on at any time.
And you could text Tom early in the morning. I know this from experience.
4:00. I'm up, man. I'm up.
Me too. We're having espresso together.
Mike, thanks, buddy. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks. Take care.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Lead Counsel Podcast. We hope you found our discussion insightful and valuable. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Stay connected with Tom on LinkedIn for updates and more insights. Have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover? Feel free to reach out through our website, tonalaw.com, or drop us an email at leadcounsel@tonalaw.com. Until next time, remember to stay informed, stay prepared, and keep leading the way in your journey. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.